I needed to come up with a topic for a doctoral dissertation, and I had read an article in an American magazine about a movement in Germany that developed after World War I and became sort of very popular after World War II, which of course was not all that long before I was reading this article. It ended in 45, and I'm talking about 55, 56. At any rate, this movement was a movement of dialogue between Protestants and Catholics. It was resisted by the Vatican. It had been since at the end of World War I when it started, but it nevertheless persisted in one way or another. And what was interesting a little bit later on was that Vatican Council II started in 1962 and went to the end of 65. In fact, made dialogue with non-Catholic Christians and even other religions and even atheists a central part of what it meant to be a Catholic in the contemporary world. So it was a 180-degree reversal. But of course, I didn't know that was going to happen in 1957. But in any case, I decided I was going to take that as researching that as my doctoral dissertation topic. So I went to Germany, got a grant from the West German government, sort of like a Fulbright grant and going the other direction. And spent 3 years there. My first daughter was born there, and then when we came back, we came back in 1960, and then 2 years later, already by that time, the idea of there being a Second Vatican Council had already been announced, and was looking very interesting and encouraging about the possibility of this whole notion of dialogue with non-Catholics being taken seriously and perhaps even changed. Well, as a matter of fact, it was, as I said, dramatically changed. So that's how I got into the whole operation of dialogue with this doctoral dissertation topic before it became popular. So in that regard, I was fortunate. I got in at the ground floor and even helped to build some of the basement, so to speak. Maybe the first group to ask about is Catholics. I think in general, Catholics and even all the way up the hierarchy to and including the Pope view it very positively. And I think certainly Protestants have long since viewed it positively. And I would say the Jews do as well. And it's interesting, for the longest time, Muslims were not at all interested. As a matter of fact, 1978, which is 30-some years ago, I helped get started a Jewish-Christian-Muslim scholars dialogue. We met every 6 weeks, every 6 months, and then once every year for until this new century. And there were maybe 10 Muslim scholars in the whole world that we could find, and we could find each other who were interested in dialogue with non-Muslims. Then, of course, came 9/11 in 2001, and at first it sort of blew everything up, and everybody was in shock. But after about 5 years, after the first 5 years of this initial shock, now Muslims are beginning to come into the dialogue in very, very serious fashion. We still have, of course, lots of the extremists, the crazies, the bombers. But hey, you should remember, even in your lifetime, Catholics and Protestants were blowing each other up in Northern Ireland until about 5 years ago. You know, and you think they would have had enough sense to not be such crazy things. Well, the Muslims, some of them, unfortunately, a significant number of them are still doing it. But first of all, ignoring the whole idea of dialogue, and then strong resistance against it. Now, in many instances, as I've indicated, it's all turned around in a positive direction, and even the most resistant area, Islam, is also now dramatically turning around. We have regularly, my Dialogue Institute here, in the last 3 years, we've had 20 students from the Middle East, meaning Egypt, Iraq, Lebanon, and Saudi Arabia, coming for 5 weeks of training in religious pluralism, interreligious dialogue democracy in the last 3 years, and plus a similar number coming from Indonesia in January, and the next batch will be coming in this January. So I find all of that kind of working. There are a lot more. I mean, I just came back 5 days ago from China. There was building a new institute of Confucian Christian dialogue this weekend coming up. I've been invited to go to a Confucian Christian dialogue at the United Nations here in New York. So this is all extremely fulfilling to have all of this resistance 50 years ago turn around and be extremely strong enthusiasm for dialogue. I mean, the whole history of humankind has been, as far as religions or ideologies are concerned, it's been one of absolutism. If I have found the truth and you are saying something different from me, well, obviously you're mistaken. I got the truth, and if you don't agree with me, you're just wrong. Well, what has happened starting in the 19th century and increasingly becoming part of our mental world of modernity is the realization that all of our knowledge, not just religious knowledge, but all physical knowledge, all your engineering knowledge, is always only partial. It's limited. You know, like, if you see the world here, and you see that part of the world, I see this part of the world. Well, they're both part of the world, but they're not both the same. You know? And so in the past, when you were describing things differently from the way I saw it, I said, oh, you're just wrong. And you said the same thing to me. Now we're realizing we always only see partially, limited. And so if I want to know more about reality, I need to be in dialogue with you and everybody else to see what you can see, but I can't. And you need to be in dialogue with me to see what I can see and you can't. Now that realization, I think, for that is at the bottom. And that realization is just expanding throughout humankind, and it has everything to do with education and critical thinking. When I talk about dialogue, it's like you take a coin. Dialogue is one side, but the other side is critical thinking. We don't want to share our ignorance. We want to share our ever-expanding knowledge and wisdom. Never ends, because we can never know everything. Here we are in the United States. You're interviewing me on Election Day, November 6th. It's one of the things that's clear to me, after 83 years living in America, that what's operating in, unfortunately, in much of the base of the Republican Party as it's structured today are very, very absolutistic kinds of Christians, basically is what it is, who think that, hey, they've got the truth, and anybody who differs from them, they're just wrong. Well, that kind of a mentality does not want to be in dialogue. All you have to do is ask yourself, what kind of a dialogue partner has the Republican Party in Congress been the last 8-10 years? zero at best, and then worse, deliberately doing everything to not be in dialogue with the other side, even if the other side came up with a good idea, maybe especially because if the other side came up with a good idea, not to do it. Well, and that kind of a mentality, whether it's in religion or in business or in politics, is very destructive, humanly speaking. And what happens, it seems to me, is eventually more and more people realize that this anti-dialogue, this I am right exclusively and absolutely, and everybody else is wrong, is a self-destructive kind of approach. I mean, you don't even make more money. In the short run, maybe so, but it's all you have to do is you look around and you see that the community of people who are doing that become less and less fully human. They become full of hate. And hate is not a good way to be a human being. It's destructive rather than constructive. When I was in Indonesia with my colleagues in this Jewish, Christian, Muslim dialogue I was telling you about that I helped get started back in 1978. Well, we were invited by the then president of Indonesia, Abdul Rahman Wahid, who was a Muslim, to come and have our, we call it trialogue, three-way dialogue between Jews, Christians, and Muslims there in Jakarta, Indonesia. And so we came. This was in the year 2000. While we were there, my friend and colleague, Professor Paul Moises, who teaches here at Rosemont College, he originally comes from what was previously Yugoslavia. He got a telephone call while we were there in a hotel in Jakarta from President Boris Trajkovski, the new president of Macedonia, which had been one of the previous republics of Yugoslavia, saying, Paul, I saw in the newspaper that you're having this Jewish, Christian, Muslim dialogue there in Indonesia. We here in Macedonia, we are falling into civil war between, especially between Muslims and Christians. And the religion, instead of being part of the solution, are part of the problem. Can you come and with your trialogue to us this next year? So we said, yes, we will try. Well, in fact, we did. Long story made short, it was a very difficult project to make it happen. When we first went there, the Orthodox Christians, who were the majority, like 75%, didn't want to do it because they didn't want to recognize the Muslims, especially. But in fact, we did have a trialogue. We did come. The result was the religious leaders, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox Christians, Jews, and Muslims, all committed themselves to meet twice a year under the sort of under the chairmanship of the president of the country, just to talk. Not wait for a crisis to come, but talk so that there wouldn't be any crisis to come. Secondly, they committed themselves to organizing a joint operating committee, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, which has been working extremely well in the city, in the country. And thirdly, they committed the Orthodox Christian Seminary and the Muslim Seminary to collaborate on both the level of professors and students. And here they were falling into civil war. We were there earlier, Professor Moises and I. We saw where the guns, they were shooting each other. We couldn't go into that area. But all of that evaporated. Now, I'm not saying that we were the only ones that turned it around, but we were a significant part of getting the religions that said no longer to be part of the problem, but part of the solution.